Welcome to the Product Backlog lecture. Upon completion, you will understand who is responsible for the product backlog, how the product backlog is used to create the sprint backlog, and how the team contributes to the product backlog. So understanding what the user truly wants is crucial before developing the product. But let me ask you this question: if the customer needs constantly change, how do you keep track of it? By using a product backlog, of course. The product backlog is a prioritized list of everything that might be included or all things that needs to be done within the product. The product owner creates, maintains, and regularly reorders the product backlog to align with the product goal. We will talk about the product goal in just a moment. Now, the product owner uses the product backlog to adapt to emerging requirements, customer feedback, and market changes. It replaces the traditional requirement specification artifacts. These items can have a technical nature or be user-centric, for example, in form of user stories. The product backlog contains all the work to be done to achieve the product goal. The backlog is made up of product backlog items or PBIs. Product PBIs can be anything from market requirements to use cases to specifications. However, the best practice is user stories or job stories. Working with the Scrum product backlog does not mean that the Scrum team is not allowed to create and use other artifacts. Examples for additional artifacts could be a summary of various user roles, workflow descriptions, user interface guidelines, storyboards, or user interface prototypes. However, these artifacts do not replace the Scrum product backlog, but complement and detail its content. PBIs at the top of the product backlog should be refined and immediately actionable. Items further down the backlog needs less definition and can reflect the bigger ideas. These larger chunks will need to be broken down into smaller pieces as they approach the top of the product backlog. The simple reason for this is that it does not make sense to invest time and effort into the specification of these requirements, as most of these requirements will have changed anyway until implementation starts. The product goal describes a future state of the product which can serve as a target for the Scrum team to plan against. The product goal is in the product backlog. The product backlog is a live artifact in that it is updated on demand as new information is available. Now, each Scrum product backlog has certain properties that differentiate it from a simple to-do list. An entry in the Scrum product backlog always adds value to the customer. So this is the first thing you have to remember. Entries without any customer value are pure waste and should not be presented anyway. Some tasks may not add direct value to the functionality. Nevertheless, they might add value by increasing quality or reducing incidents in the long term. The entry in the Scrum product backlog are prioritized and ordered accordingly. All entries are prioritized and Scrum product backlog is ordered. The Scrum product owner, with the help of the Scrum team, does the prioritization, add value, costs, risks, and the most common factors for prioritization. With this prioritization, the Scrum product owner decides what should be done next. The level of details depends on the position of the entry within the Scrum product backlog. All entries are estimated. All the entries within the Scrum product backlog have to be estimated according to the agreed definition, for example, story points. This estimation can then be used to prioritize entries in the Scrum product backlog and to plan releases. The Scrum product backlog is a living document. The Scrum product backlog is changed throughout the whole project. If needed, the new requirements are added and existing requirements may be modified and defined in more detail or even deleted. Requirements are no longer frozen early on. Instead, the final set of requirements within the Scrum product backlog is also developed iteratively, together with resulting software. This is different from traditional requirements engineering, but allows maximizing customer value and minimizing development efforts. There are no action items or low-level tasks in Scrum product backlog. The Scrum product backlog shall not contain the detailed requirements information. Ideally, the final requirements are defined together with the customer during the sprint. Breakdown and distribution of these requirements is the responsibility of the Scrum team. Okay, now let's talk how to keep the product backlog healthy. Once the product backlog is built, it is important to regularly maintain it to keep pace with the program. Product owners should review the backlog before each sprint planning meeting to ensure prioritization is correct and feedback from the last sprint has been incorporated. Regular review of the backlog is often called product backlog refinement, and in the agile circles some use the term backlog grooming. Once the backlog gets larger, product owner needs to group the backlog into near-term and long-term items. Near-term items need to be fully fleshed out before they are labeled as such. This means the complete user story has been drawn up, collaboration with designer and developer has been sorted out, and estimated from developers have been made. Longer-term items can remain a bit vague, though it's a good idea to get a rough estimate from developers to help prioritize them. The keyword here is rough estimate, which will change once the team fully understands and begins work on those long-term items. The backlog serves as a connection between the product owner and developers. The product owner is free to reprioritize work in the backlog at any time due to customer feedback, refining estimates, and add new requirements. Once work in progress, try to keep changes to a minimum as they disrupt the developers and affect the focus, flow, and morale of the team. The product backlog also serves as a foundation for a sprint planning. All work items should be included in the backlog, from user stories, bugs, design changes, technical debt, customer requests, action items from retrospective, etc. This ensures everyone's work items are included in overall discussion for each sprint. Team members can then make trade-offs with the product owner before starting a sprint with complete knowledge of everything that needs to be done. Deep product backlogs. Well, deep is actually an acronym that is often used to describe a good product backlog, where D stands for detailed. Product backlogs are sufficiently detailed in that it is clear what functionality is needed or how the product should behave. This is where the product owner can express the business need in a way that it's easy for the team to understand. It doesn't mean that the product backlog has implementation details or describes how the team is to build it. There should not be a technology specification in the product backlog. So the first E in deep is for estimated. All the backlog items that are included in the next release should be estimated. Estimates support release planning and provide the Scrum team some idea on how long it would take to complete those items based on the team's past performance. The total work remaining and the time it should take the team to complete the backlog based on the past velocity should be readily computable at all times. The second E in deep stands for emergent. By emergent, I mean that the backlog items will change and evolve over time. The backlog is not considered static in any sense. Traditional projects will usually try to freeze or lock down requirements at the start of the project. Scrum team benefits by letting the needs evolve based on feedback and learning to specific backlog items until the last responsible moment. The P in deep stands for prioritized. The backlog should always be prioritized from the top to bottom, with the most important features at the top. It is the rank ordered. We don't use priority schemes like low, medium, or high, because that can lead to everything be designated as a high, or people saying everything has to get done. The team can only work on a few items at a time, and the product owner supports this by rank ordering the product backlog. Working with the backlog. The backlog needs regular attention and care. It needs to be managed carefully. At the end of the project, the Scrum team and its product owner starts by writing down everything they can think of easily. This is almost always more enough for the first sprint. After this initial setup, the product backlog has to be maintained in an ongoing process that comprises the following steps. As a new item are discovered, they are described and added to the list. Existing ones are changed or removed as appropriate. Ordering the product backlog. So the most important items are moved to the top. Preparing the high priority entries for the next sprint planning meeting, and estimated or re-estimating the entries in the product backlog. The product owner is responsible for making sure that the product backlog is in good shape. That is a collaborative process. When using the Scrum framework, about 10% of the Scrum team total time should be reserved for maintaining the product backlog, discussion, estimation, etc. The collaborative maintenance of the Scrum product backlog helps to clarify the requirements and creates the buy-in from the Scrum team. Tools for the product backlog. There are lots of tools on the market to help product owners manage the product backlog. Note that there is only one product backlog for the team. Managing multiple lists in different tools is not effective. I encourage teams to use the simplest tool that gets the job done. For example, Jira from Atlassian is a simple tool and one of the most popular Agile Lifecycle Management tools in use today. Jira provides a centralized view of the product backlog, and it supports both Scrum and Kanban approaches. Microsoft Azure DevOps tools are also very popular. And you can also try with Trello, which is free software to use. And let me give you a couple pro tips. So start with the 2 R's. A team's roadmap and requirements provide a foundation for the product backlog. Roadmap initiatives break down into several epics, and each epic will have several requirements and user stories. Second, keep everything in one issue tracking software. Don't use multiple systems to track bugs, requirements, and engineering work items. Keep it all in a single backlog. 3. Stakeholders will change priorities, and that's good. Fostering discussion around what's important gets everyone's priorities in sync. These discussions foster a culture of group prioritization, ensuring everyone shares the same mindset on the program. 4. Product owner dictate the priority of the work items in the backlog, while the developers dictate the velocity through the backlog. This can be a tensions relationship from the product owners who wants to push work to the team. And lastly, size of a product backlog. So how big should a product backlog be? A general rule of thumb is that the product backlog should have no more than 100 items. Larger than that, it becomes nearly impossible for one person to prioritize the product backlog effectively. In the case of 700 plus maintained items, you can try to cluster similar requests and delete items that were more than, for example, 1 year old. Through this process, try to reduce the product backlog items about to 100 max.